Happy September to everybody, and welcome back to the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast. The episode was pre recorded and missed a couple of major events from the weekend, so we wanted to come on and pre record an update on those. The upcoming episode covers the Metropolitan, so the first being a contract update and big news for the Carolina Hurricanes in Seth Jarvis. As on Saturday morning, the Carolina Hurricanes signed the star forward to a new 8-year deal worth $63.2 million. And Carolina cleverly eluded the $7.9 million cap hit through some signing bonuses for Jarvis and deferred money. That reaches a cap hit for Carolina around $7.42 million and gives them $775,000 to work with to sign either an extra forward or an extra defenseman as they enter training camp. Jarvis coming off a season last year where he played 81 games and recorded 67 points while playing power play and penalty kill versatility throughout the lineup, and also allegedly the last 4 months of the season on a dislocated shoulder. And expect him to be quite a bit better here coming up. We're going to talk about that situation before it had happened, where he was one of the unsigned RFAs with the upcoming guest, Jim Cerny, the editor for the New York Rangers. But the main reason for coming on before the start of the podcast is to update the tragedy that happened earlier last week. On Thursday night, rumors began swirling around Twitter, and many in the hockey community lost sleep over those rumors, begging them not to be true. Unfortunately, on Friday morning, August 30th, the Columbus Blue Jackets released a statement confirming those fears and worse that shook the entire hockey world for the weekend and still into this week. The night prior, while biking home from their sister's wedding rehearsal dinner, Columbus Blue Jackets star forward Johnny Gaudreau and his younger brother Matthew were struck and killed by 43-year-old Sean Higgins. According to the police report, Higgins entered the southbound lane on County Route 551 to pass a sedan and an SUV that he was following. As the SUV moved to the middle of the roadway to safely pass the bikers, Higgins cut between the two cars and attempted to pass the SUV on the right shoulder, where he struck both Johnny and Matthew from behind. Higgins admitted to the officers that before entering the car, he had consumed between 5 and 6 beers, and they also found an open container in the car that he was drinking while driving. Their sister's wedding was supposed to take place the following day, which was on Friday, the day this was all released. Tributes have poured out, and an immense amount of love has been spread through the impact of Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew, the impact that Johnny had on professional hockey, and the bigger impact that Matthew had on Johnny's life. Both played their NCAA careers at Boston College. Johnny won the 2012 national championship there, where he scored the game clinching goal as a freshman. He also won the Hobey Baker 2 years later as a junior with Matty by his side. That was Matthew Gaudreau's freshman year. And the story says that the reason they picked Boston College was because of Matthew. And if it wasn't for Matthew, Johnny would never have been able to finish his degree, going back during the summers to live in Matthew's dorm room and attend those classes. After turning professional over 9 seasons with the Calgary Flames, Johnny became the fifth leading scorer in franchise history, including a 115-point season during 2021 and 22 that he put the icing on the cake of, scoring in Game 7 against Dallas to advance to the Stanley Cup playoffs. Gaudreau spent the past 2 seasons in Columbus as the assistant captain, where he signed a long-term deal to start up his family. His brother Matthew and his wife were also expecting their first child upcoming, their first baby Trip, where a GoFundMe page has raised now nearly $500,000 through donations of players around the NHL, friends of the family, and fans who felt the major impact of the Gaudreau brothers in the hockey world. The hockey community has been devastated by this tragedy, and we want to send our thoughts out to the family, friends, and teammates, as well as the entire Columbus Blue Jackets organization, who unfortunately now has to experience this morning for the second time in as many years. Johnny Gaudreau was 31 years old, his brother Matthew just 29.
As they say in hockey, let's do that hockey.
Play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to keep it simple.
Get pucks deep, putting the puck deep.
Put pucks in deep.
We got to keep it simple and just get pucks going forward.
Getting into the forecheck.
We got to keep playing aggressive.
Trying to take away their time and space.
We're focused on tonight. We just got to stick to our game.
We are officially within 1 month until the start of the NHL hockey season. Colin Kapoor is back, and so is the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast with episode 8 and our Metropolitan Division breakdown. And excited to have a guest joining us shortly, as reporter Jim Cerny from the New York Rangers will be coming along with George Bannister, Colin Kapoor, and George Bannister and Colin Kapoor. I'm Casey Ditzel, and we'll go right to Colin. Colin, it's been a little while since we've seen you, but now going to be back to being a regular here. A wild summer comes to a close, and now you're back on hockey mode.
Yeah, you said it, Casey. It's good to be back. That's first things first. We spent the entire summer in central Wisconsin, so that was a bit of a shift for me, but now I'm back home getting set for the hockey season, getting hyped up for this hockey season. It's going to be a good one. College hockey, pro hockey, all of it. It's going to be a fun ride. Happy to be back here with you guys.
We have major news, but I'm going to save that to end the podcast on a big time note. George, another week of broadcasting in the books for you. What's going on out east?
Oh, finally in full soccer and field hockey mode, but honestly can't wait to get into full hockey mode, and what better way to do it with our divisional previews.
And one thing, George, I just got to say, I wasn't too familiar with your soccer work until just a couple days ago, or it might have been yesterday at time of recording. Holy Cross Soccer, I really liked what I was hearing. The top shelf rocket to open up the game was the sight to behold. So that was some great work. I'm looking forward to seeing what you put together as the season goes on.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. It was a surprise to everyone that he took a shot, first career goal, and what better way to do it?
Nonetheless, his soccer trending on Twitter, but how about he sent to us his water polo clips? You'll have to take a look after this, Colin. His water polo is pretty dang good too on the heels of the Olympics here.
Always wanted to call it, always enjoyed. That was one of the sports I always watched during the Olympics, was water polo, and had always had that kind of in my mind. And when I got the opportunity to call the Bruno Classic, the famous tournament where, you know, you get Stanford, you get Cal coming from the West Coast over here to either Providence or Cambridge at Brown and Harvard, and get the chance to call that, you always got to take it.
Throughout the next month, we're going to be breaking down each division and bringing along a guest that correlates. Again, today, it's Jim Cerny from the Rangers. We're going to go through each team, starting with New York, obviously, and George, very excited to get there. We'll break through all 8 teams, in the Metropolitan here today, and then we'll go through some of our predictions on where the standings might land come the end of the season. We'll finish it off with some of our favorite betting picks coming up for the upcoming year in the Metro. Next week, we're going to stay in the East, the Atlantic Division. We'll welcome on Jimmy Murphy from the Boston Bruins. We'll send it to the Central then, and Pete Weber of the Nashville Predators joining us coming up, and Jack Michaels from the Edmonton Oilers before we get to October and the official opening puck drop on 2024-25. And we're extremely excited now to welcome Jim Cerny, the editor for the New York Rangers. And George is extremely excited to get all his questions out of the way. Jim, a short off season for you, and it's getting even shorter here as the days count by. What have you been spending the summer up to here as you get ready for opening puck drop pretty shortly?
Yeah, well, as you said, I run the website Forever Blue Shirts, so it's all blue shirts all the time, but it's not just them. It's everything that goes on in the NHL. So Just staying on top of all the news, whether it's fun stuff like Adam Fox got married this summer, you got to get that information out there, kind of your page 6 type story. And obviously, the bigger stories like the Jacob Trouba trade, no trade, as it turned out to be, or, the Ryan Lindgren contract with the Rangers and the rest of the things that have gone on in the division, the big leap by the New Jersey Devils back, I think into the, being one of the top 1 or 2 teams in the Metropolitan Division, Columbus trading Patrick Laine, Philadelphia bringing over Mitch Cobb. There's so many big stories within the division this summer. And you can argue the Rangers, who, were the division winners, the President's Trophy winners, might have been the least conspicuous of all the teams in the division, this summer, this offseason. They might have been the quietest team, of the 8 in the Metropolitan Division this summer. So, it'd be interesting. I think it's going to be a really, really tight division this year. And I'm excited to see how it plays out, see if the Rangers come back to the pack after such a big year, see how big a leap the Devils make. Hey, are the Flyers finally a playoff team? I think there are a lot of great storylines coming our way.
George, we'll hand it over to you. Take the reins.
Well, let's start here because we're all broadcasters on this podcast. You recently had a conversation with one of the many legends that have graced Madison Square Garden for the New York Rangers, Sam Rosen, who's officially announced he's retiring after this year. What was that conversation like, sitting down with Sam and going over his illustrious 40-year career with the Rangers?
Yeah, it was, first of all, for me, it was really fun because, over the years, Sam has become a personal friend. I worked for the Rangers for 10 years. Before that, I did a talk show for the league. I did play-by-play for the Islanders. Since then, I've worked for the league at NHL.com. So I've had a ton of interaction with Sam over the years. And I can't say enough good things about him. And I'm so happy that he's able to make this decision on his own, and he's able to go out on his own terms. Unfortunately, that's typically not the case in our crazy business. Someone tells you it's time to move on, or, hey, we've got this younger kid, we're going to go with him. He's half the price, Sam. That wasn't the case. Sam got to make his own call. And I think that's really cool after, 4 decades of calling Ranger games. And you're right, he's a legend. He's not just the voice of Rangers hockey for a generation. He's the voice of Rangers hockey for generations. I kind of grew up, my teens and beyond, with him taking over from Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon was the voice of my youth. And then there was Sam and Phil Esposito, and then Sam and JD, and then, boom, I was in the business. And, then we were contemporaries, though I will never claim to be on Sam's level, with my career. But, it was just fun. It felt like 2 friends talking hockey. And, that's really cool when it's somebody that I respect so much and, that, has brought so much to my life and to my career, and that I learned a lot from. About just being yourself on camera and with your broadcast partners. If you genuinely like that person, man, it's going to make for a great listen, a great broadcast. If you guys have fun and you tease each other and you joke around, the people feel like they're part of the family. They're part of your family. Sam and JD and us, or Sam and Joe and us. That, to me, that's who Sam Rosen is. And I was blessed, to sit in the back of the Rangers plane for, 10 seasons and hang out and schmooze with the schmoozer himself, and talk hockey, historically, or maybe what we just saw 2 hours before on the ice. I'm blessed, that I had that opportunity and, to sit down and be able to do pretty much Sam's first interview that he did after he announced his retirement, was a cool thing.
I'm pretty sure that wasn't an accident on his part either. The fact that you
Well,
got the first.
I appreciate that. Yeah, we'll see.
All right, let's jump right into it. And you've already kind of touched upon this. The Rangers didn't do any flashy signings that some fans were maybe pining for. Would you consider them kind of settling for Sam Carrick and Riley Smith and leaving pretty much the rest of the lineup untouched, including Jacob Trouba?
Yeah, so it's a great question. They had to settle because they're so far up against the salary cap. Now, Kurt's Jury tried to move Jacob Trouba. That would have opened up, assuming they didn't have to eat salary, that would have opened up $8 million in salary cap space. So they could have been players for Jake Gensel, for example, or, probably not Sam Reinhart. It looked like Sam was probably going to do whatever it took to work out a deal to stay in Florida. But, there were some big names out there. I've heard from many, many people, connected people, that they were really, really interested in Steven Stamkos. But there's no way they could have afforded Steven Stamkos unless they moved to Jacob Trouba. They had to move significant salary to make a move like that. So considering the situation and not being able to move Trouba, kind of held tight to his no trade teams until July 1, until the last minute. Really, Chris Drury's hands were tied. And I'm not trying to make excuses for him, but I'm not sure what he could have done that would have created enough space where he could have been a player in free agency. So short of that, what are you going to do? Well, he opened up some space by, putting Barclay Goodrow on waivers. And they signed Sam Carrick for almost a third, basically a third of the price. And Sam Carrick's a nice fourth line center, good physical player, not Barclay Goodrow, certainly doesn't have the pedigree, 2 cups, 2 Stanley Cup rings. But, the big thing is Riley Smith, right? That's their big get. And I think if you're a Ranger fan, I think it's a massive letdown. Riley Smith's not sexy, right? That's not a sexy name. I know he won the Cup a couple years ago. Huge contributor to Vegas that year when they won the Cup, and even the years before that. He's 33, coming off a down year. He is what he is. Larry Brooks and I were talking about this about a month ago, and we both said the same thing. Boy, the Rangers are like 2-3 years late on this trade, getting Riley Smith. To me, he's a good third line player. But now, is he going to be with Zibanejad and Kreider, and you're going to expect him to be a 60, 70-point guy? I don't think that's who Riley Smith is anymore. Now, maybe he's an okay fit. We'll see. And, I don't know if you guys saw the story on the site yesterday, but I made the argument, I made the case, and I'm not a huge Capo Caco fan. But I think this is his last kick of the can with the Rangers, right? Because next year he's an RFA again. 2 years he's unrestricted. You got to make a decision. I can't see him staying in New York for years and years as a third line player. He's a good third line player. He needs to be a top 6 guy. He needs to get another crack at playing with Zibanejad and Kreider. It was a disaster last year. It didn't work. Didn't work for any of them. And the Rangers then pulled him off the line. He got hurt, went to the third line, and it was fine on the third line. He needs to start training camp on that line. You need to know that in his age 24 season, you gave Capo Caco at least one last chance before you said, nah, that's not who he is. Or, oh, it finally worked, like it did with Alexis Lafreniere last year with Trocheck and Panarin. They need to find that out. You can't just go into camp and say, oh, Riley Smith's our top line guy and Caco's on our third line. To me, that's backwards. Start with Caco or even Brennan Othman. Start with one of the younger guys and see if they're a fit. If they're not, and Caco hasn't been that fit yet, if they're not, they're not. To me, Riley Smith is a safety net. Okay, he's a reliable veteran. One way or the other, he'll mix in with those guys. It won't be sexy, it won't be exciting, but okay. Give Caco and then Othman behind him, give them the first cracks at it. To me, those are their most important decisions heading into training camp. So I kind of veered away from your question a little bit, but I think it ties into, where Riley Smith, in my opinion, fits going into the season.
No, it ties in perfectly, and I'm glad you mentioned Alexis Lafreniere because that's my next question. If he could repeat or eclipse his numbers and play from last year, where do you see him coming in contract-wise after this mini bridge contract? Are the Rangers looking at Jason Robertson numbers at 9.2 or something along the lines of maybe like a Kyle Connor at 7.5?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think Lafreniere has shown that he's a $9 million player yet, but he was good last year, and he was really good at even strength. And where, Rangers don't have a lot of issues. Let's be honest. That's a good team. That's a good roster, top to bottom. I know that their warts got exposed by Florida in the conference final. That's a good roster. That's a good team. They won 55 games, 114 points last year. They're legit. Lafreniere is a really good player, and he's heading this way, right? It's only 22. I know everyone expected him to hit his stride when he was 19 or 20. It didn't happen. He's 22. He's hitting his stride. He's going to be really good. I don't think he's a $9 million player, but Rangers have some. Chris Drury's in a tough spot.
Mm-hmm.
Shesterkin is going to be looking for at least $12 million a year. He wants to be the highest paid goalie in NHL history. Lafreniere, if it's a long-term deal, like if they can lock him up for 6, 7, 8 years, it's got to be $8 million a year, right? Lafreniere is not going to sign for that many years without that kind of money, I don't think, right? He's going to figure, geez, the way I'm going, if I not hold out, but if I sign another bridge deal, I'm going to be worth what? 9, 10 million. Yeah, maybe in his mind in another couple of years. Right. And the cap's going up. Absolutely. So Chris Drury's in a tough spot there. And K'Andre Miller is also a restricted free agent with arbitration rights next offseason too. And he is a tremendously valuable tool as well. Piece of the puzzle. He's a core guy. Lafreniere is a core guy. Shesterkin is the core guy. That's a lot of money, that you're going to. The Rangers have to make hay this season because I don't see how they bring back Ryan Lindgren next year. I don't see how they find that right wing if it's not Gabe Perreault or Brendan Othman next year, right? It's got to be a guy at an entry-level contract because you're not going to be able to get another free agent, big name free agent in unless you really start clearing guys out. And I do believe Trouba won't be back for the final year of his deal. So that'll open up some money. But really for those things to work, for them to get Miller, Lafreniere, and Shesterkin, that's what, 25, right? Yeah, between 25 and 30, 25 on the good ends, if Drury is lucky. That's a lot of cap space that you're signing up for next year. So Gabe Perreault better be an NHL player coming out of college. Brendan Othman better be an NHL player at age 22 next season. Will Cooley better be able to make that next step. Lafreniere better be a star, or else they actually start coming back to the pack, because of the salary cap. Salary cap really is a neutralizer, if you will, or not a neutralizer, an equalizer, in the NHL.
You mentioned Shesterkin looking for about 12. Do you think the situation with Jeremy Swayman in Boston right now, is that going to have any implication with that contract coming next year?
So there is not a chance in my mind that Igor signs his contract before Swayman signs his, right? Because Igor can wait. He can wait up until July 1, if he wanted to. I don't think he wants to. I know the Rangers don't want that. But he's in no rush, really. So Swayman, you got to figure, has got to get played out before opening night for sure. Probably before the start of training camp or into the first week or so of training camp. He is the most comparable guy right now for Shesterkin. And then you can argue Shesterkin's camp will say, let's say totally making it up. Swayman gets $8-9 million a year on a long-term deal. Not saying it's going to happen. Maybe it's still a shorter term deal and he gets less money, whatever. But let's just argue and say he makes $9 million. Igor is going to say, oh, that's great. I've won the Vezina. I have more years in the league. I've gone to 2 conference finals, yada, yada. Look at my numbers. Swayman, yeah, he had a terrific playoff run last year, but I took my team within 2 games of the Stanley Cup final. So Igor is going to say, yeah, okay, he's $8-9 million. X, Y above that.
11,
so,
12, yeah.
Yeah, 11, 12. Absolutely. So he certainly won't sign. His people are going to be looking at what Swayman gets, and that's just going to be the jumping off point. He's not going to say, oh, Swayman signed for that. That's good for me. No. That's the jumping off point for him. And really, the jumping off point is Carey Price and Sergei Bobrovsky at that 10.5 million.
You mentioned Gabe Perreault. Is his lack of signing his ELC similar to Rucker McGroarty, where he wanted a guarantee to be on the NHL roster, but because he didn't, he just said, okay, well, I want to run it back with BC?
Yeah, I don't know. There's been nothing, there's been nothing for Perreault's camp and nothing from the Rangers, though the Rangers are like, they're imitating the Lou Lamoriello gulag, if you will. I mean, no information comes out from that organization anymore. But there's been no no even inkling that that's the case. I really think that the Rangers believe, what, Perreault can benefit from another year being the stud in college, playing in the World Juniors. Now he's going to take on an even bigger role, with the United States. He'll take on a bigger role leadership-wise too at Boston College. So I think the Rangers were all for it. They certainly didn't want to force him into a role that maybe he wasn't ready for yet. And I think the kid wanted to go back to college. They came close to winning the national championship last year. I think he wants to run it back and take another swing at it this year. I know that some of the guys have moved on, from that group, but I think he legitimately wanted to seriously, take another whack at it. I do not see him being anywhere but on his entry-level contract next season, though. I think he's going to be part of the organization as soon as he plays his final college game, this season, his sophomore year.
Jersey Devils were a team you talked about at the start there, and a lot of anticipation around their offseason, a lot of regression there with a lot to do with injuries there. Dougie Hamilton on the blue line. They go add Pesce, who's played alongside Hamilton, found success, and likely will be a huge asset for Luke Hughes. They also go and add to the forward core Markstrom, a huge piece. But I've heard a lot of fans questioning whether or not the defense is going to be strong enough still, because the goaltending got blamed and Lindy Ruff gets fired, but a lot of that comes from what's in front of the goaltender. No matter how good the goaltending is, the defense needs to be there to help him out. But adding the pieces they have, adding Markstrom, is that going to be enough to help out and reverse the regression that we saw from last season? And not only that, but make them the contender that people are saying they're going to be, where the betting odds have them at the top of the Metro?
So the answer is yes and no. Markstrom isn't the answer by himself, but man, is he a massive upgrade in the net to what they had last year. And it's not just him. Now they have the veteran Jake Allen as the number 2. Now, if you told me Jake Allen's going to be our guy, I'd be like, that's not a huge upgrade. But if Jake Allen's your number 2 and Jacob Markstrom's your number 1, that's a legit twosome in the NHL. So now you stabilize the goaltending, because let's face it, Vanacek was massive disappointment last year. Nico Dawes, I thought flashed, but I think he's a guy that still needs some seasoning, so he'll get that now, in the American League. Akira Schmid, to me, was a total flash in the pan. He kind of caught fire at the right time in the Rangers series 2 years ago. I think Nico Dawes is a much better goalie than Akira Schmid. but Schmid, played last year. He was part of that mix. He wasn't very good. They were a mess in goal, but you're right. It wasn't just the goalies. It was the team defense in front of them, and that's not just the defenseman. It was the entire structure was a mess. Now, that said, part of the breakdown was losing Dougie Hamilton. And, I know Dougie's seen more as a, real, offensive force from the blue line, but he's a huge defensively responsible force in his own end of the ice. Just how quickly he gets the puck out of the zone, how confidently he gets the puck out of the zone, how he doesn't panic in his own end. You may not think of him as, a real defensive defenseman, but he's got that experience, he's got that confidence, and he's a guy you rely on to get it up, out, off his stick, up to the forwards, up to Jack Hughes, and out of the zone. They did not have that last season, because he missed most of the year. So you also had a couple guys that I think are going to be stars in this league, but they were just babies last year, Luke Hughes and Simone Nemec. I think they're both going to be terrific players, but then they were tossed into situations where, they were in over their heads so much last year. So now they can kind of step back and have partners that cover them. Maybe even get a little bit less ice time, possibly, because you have guys, Brendan Dillon's here now, Brett Pesce is here now, Dougie Hamilton is healthy, Siegenthaler is still here. Then you have those two as well. It really eases the burden on them. And they also now have a full year each of NHL experience under their belt. And they're really good, both of those kids. But defenseman is a really difficult position to jump into at age 19 and 20, in the National Hockey League. I think the Devils are going to be really good this year. We got a glimpse of it 2 years ago. That's a team, that's a franchise that's won 3 Stanley Cup championships, right? 2 years ago was the best regular season in franchise history. And that was with, Blackwood and Vanacek were the goalies. It was a little smoke and mirrors defensively, but they are elite offensively. And Jack Hughes is 2 years better than he was then. Nico Hischier is one of the most underrated two-way centers in the game. Dawson Mercer is a third liner. He could be a top 6 for a lot of teams. I mean, I could go on and on. Yet Jesper Bratt has become a really upper echelon player in this league. And then all that they've done with their defense now and their goaltending, I know the Rangers go into the season on paper as the team to beat in the division. I could make the argument that the Devils are at least as good as the Rangers are heading into this season.
You mentioned Luke Hughes. Right now, Devils have about $5 million in cap space. If they don't make any other moves, they have about another $4 million coming off the books next year. What do you see as the next contract for Luke Hughes?
So, right. Teams are being aggressive these days in trying to get their young studs, signed up for the long haul. Jack Hughes is an example in New Jersey. He's got himself a nice deal, but probably that's going to be a team-friendly deal at some point, if not now already. So Luke Hughes is probably that next guy with the Devils. I don't know if it's going to be this next offseason or it's going to be the one after, but it's probably going to be in the next year or two. And if they go into that, you're probably looking at, assuming he continues to progress at the level he's at, you're probably looking at 8 for his next deal. That seems to be the trend now. Teams want to do that. You kind of target 1 or 2 guys and, maybe pay more now and save later. And you're saving later when the cap is, doing this, as Marco pointed out. It'll be continuously going up. But the Devils, listen, the Devils cap situation, at least as of today, is a little bit more manageable than the Rangers. The Rangers really have some work to do. And, I don't see how Ryan Lindgren, for example, comes back. Now, you could argue that's good or bad. He may be a guy that ages quickly, kind of that Dan Girardi syndrome where he just, that style he plays doesn't age
punishment.
well, into age 31, 32, 33, which he's still, 5, 6 years, 7 years away from. But, I don't think Lindgren's going to age well. I think the Rangers know it. I think they're probably okay knowing that he probably won't return, next season. But, there are other decisions too. Let's say Kakko. We talk about Kakko. What if Kakko has that breakout year like Laffy, did this year? Uh-oh. Now we got to pay Kaapo Kakko too because he's an RFA next year and a UFA the following year, right? So he becomes a UFA before Lafreniere does. So now, it's a great problem to have, but a problem nonetheless. It also makes him more, marketable in a trade. Arguably, maybe you get younger assets back. If you're the Rangers, if you believe, all right, we got the most out of Kakko we can't pay him on this next contract. Let's see what we can get from him. His value is now up. Like they didn't trade low on him this summer. And, hope that Brennan Othman or Gabe Perreault is a top 6 right wing.
Carolina Hurricanes
Jim,
loyalist. Sorry, go ahead, Colin.
Yeah, I think just keep running it down, Jim. The Canes are one of those teams, Hurricanes, that are very interesting to me because, you think about the last 5, even going longer years, they're always a team that's in the mix. They're right there. And then the past few years, it's been, this is a team that, could do it. They have the pieces. They, look at last year, they get Jake Gensel. And then this offseason happens. And that's what I want to talk to you about. So many departures, a lot of consternation, just looking about on social media, what the fan base is saying about what transpired this offseason. So, can you run down a little bit of what happened this offseason and your thoughts on it? And if this Hurricanes team has what it takes, can they be competitive with a team like the Rangers and with a team like the Devils?
Yeah, you ask a string of good questions there. And first of all, I'm happy to hear Colin speak because, your two partners there were just like beating you down to take it over the microphone there.
Well, it's my first episode back in a while, so I had to let them get their licks in, and then I'll jump in here in the middle.
Just ease into it. Exactly. Oh, listen, great questions that you asked. Carolina is going to be a really intriguing team to watch this offseason or this upcoming season because this offseason was not super kind to them. You lose Brett Pesce, you lose Brady Shea. Those were 2 huge losses defensively. And I've seen the arguments made, they signed Sean Walker and Shane Gostisbehere. Listen, 2 very good NHL defensemen. They are, at least in my opinion, not in the league of Brett Pesce and Brady Shea. Not even close. So, you've walked backwards there, on your defense core. And then, up front, you lose Teravainen. He goes to Chicago. So that's another key loss. You did retain Simone Nemec. There for a while, I thought they were going to lose him. Not Simone, I'm sorry, Simone Nemec. I'm talking Devils here. Martin Necas. He demanded a trade. Looked like he was going to skip town. I was like, oh man, it's one blow after another. But they were able to retain him, which was positive. But the big blow was not being able, after you move so many pieces to get Jake Gensel, was not being able to re-sign. And I know they get draft pick from Tampa and all that. They got something for nothing, but boy, that's tough. You make that trade last year with 2 thoughts in mind. One, you're going for it. You're trying to win the Stanley Cup because you see the writing on the wall. You see Teravainen's a free agent. You see Pesce's a free agent. You see Shea's a free agent. You see Freddie Anderson's another year older. So you're like, we're going for it. We never do this if you're Carolina. You go and get Gensel. But part B of that is, well, if we fall short, well, we still have the negotiating rights with him. And we got to keep this guy, right? You gave up a decent package to get him. They don't keep him. So they don't win the cup. They don't get out of the second round of the playoffs. And then they lose Gensel. That's kick in the head. And then as you reel back, you get kicked in the back of the head and you get kicked forward, right? They got you coming and going. So Carolina is a team to watch. I think Rod Brindamore is one of the best coaches in the league. I think he's got a great system. He's got a great buy-in from his best players, from Sebastian Aho, on down, Jacob Slavin on down. Guys follow their lead. They buy into the system, but they're not as good. I think it's Devils, Rangers, Rangers, Devils. And then, Carolina's in that next tier. And, you could argue Washington's made great strides. Are they equal to Carolina? Maybe not going into the season, but I'm curious, to see what Washington can be. Philly, maybe not this year, but maybe in another year, maybe they're leapfrogging Carolina. I'm worried about Carolina from their perspective, that window might be doing this. They've had a terrific 6-year run. And now I'm like, did that window close on them? Did losing in the second round to the Rangers and then losing Gensel and all these other players, was that their window shutting closed? Or is Rod Brindamore an absolute magician and this team, still finishes top 2 in the division, and makes another go of it next year? I mean, Freddie Anderson, I see him splitting the goaltending with Kochetkov this year. I think he is really ready. I think the kid is really ready to take on that load. I think he proved it last year when Freddie was hurt. And I think that keeps Freddie more fresh, which I think will be good come playoff time. But you got to get in the playoffs too. And I'm curious to see them over 82 games.
And I think we're in lockstep on that. It's so interesting because the way, and as a Rangers guy, the way that series ended and the way that it began, I mean, with the Canes getting punched in the mouth and then they fight back to make it 3-2, kind of reminds me of the Celtics a couple of years ago in the Eastern Conference Finals, where they have a chance and it feels like there's a prayer there, and then it just flames out on them. And when that happened, when the Rangers won that game and won that series, the sequence of events that happened right after that, you're like, how can you battle back from this? But I think the key point that you made is that it's Rod Brindamore, and that it's Rod Brindamore. It's his system. He is one of the best coaches in the NHL. So I don't think you can write them off here. But when you're in a division that has, and I'm a Cavs fan, you can see it behind me. I'm high on Washington. There's going to be a little bit more parity in this Metro, I think, this season because of, you mentioned the New Jersey Devils. So I'm intrigued to see what happens with Carolina, but I won't be surprised if there's a bit more of a fall off even then, just to that number 3 spot. Maybe it's down into the middle of the pack.
Yeah, and I think that's why they're so intriguing to me. I still see, I see a heck of a great coach, and it's still a good lineup, good roster. We didn't even touch on their bottom 6 took a hit too. Losing Stefan Nason, and, they lost gritty guys there, that were part of their identity. So it's not only the top level guys that they missed or that they're going to miss. You mentioned the Capitals. I really find them fascinating. First of all, I couldn't believe they made the playoffs last year, with the minus 27, right? It was 27 goal differential. And, I mean, I knew that they were going to get blown out by the Rangers in the first round, but it was such a feat that they made the playoffs. And, I know Philly collapsed, the last couple weeks and everything, but Washington earned their way in. And, that I thought that was huge for a bunch of their younger players, and for Spencer Carberry, who I think is going to be a hell of a coach in this league. I love him. I love how honest he is. You watch his post-game press conferences, like he's spot on. He doesn't pull punches. I love him. And, they're going to have some good young talent coming in this year. Really like Hendrix Lapierre. I think he's going to be a player. But, they took some chances. Pierre-Luc Dubois, who knows? Flip a coin. on if that's going to be a good trade or a disaster. But you know what? You rid yourself of Darcy Kemper's contract. You took on a worse contract, but but if it works, right? If it works, you're taking a chance on a guy that plays a premium position at center. They are weak down the middle. We're weak down the middle. I like it. Take the chance on him. See how he fits here. He's still young, still time, to deliver. Mangiapane is a guy I've always liked. Certainly coming off a down year. He's going to be UFA at the end of the year. He's got a lot to play for. Love bringing in Logan Thompson to team him with Charlie Lindgren between the pipes. And then boom, you had the two defensemen as well.
Yep.
And, and their defense wasn't terrible. Mm-mm. And now you had, Chychrun and Watt to your defense. Boy, I really like what they did. I think that they can make a big step. Carolina might be chasing Washington, for that third spot, in the division this year. Again, we'll see. Rod Brindamore can just make me eat all my words. I respect him that much. But I really I love Carberry. I liked some of the young talent. And the fact that they made the playoffs last year, and now knowing that, I think they're going to be much better this year. They're a team to watch.
And Casey, George, if you can allow me to step up onto my soapbox about the Caps 1 quick second. I mean,
go for it.
I think, Jim, you touched on two very important things there. And the biggest one for me, and I was on a podcast before the season ended for the Caps, and there was like controversy. It was like, do the Caps need to make the playoffs? Do we want them to tank for a pick? And I was like, listen, getting Connor McMichael and Hendrix Lapierre into the playoffs, even if it's 4 games, even if they get dusted by the Rangers, it's still huge. And you saw Lapierre's goal against New York, and I think it was game 3. Absolutely excellent goal, and seeing a player as young as him step up in a situation like that, do it all himself, is huge. And I think you mentioned Carberry as well. I'm totally in agreement with you there. I think he's one of the best up and coming coaches in the NHL. And as a guy, I mean, all 4 of us can relate to sitting in press conferences and kind of being, on occasions unimpressed with what media, coaches, players give to you. Seeing Spencer Carberry go out there and be, in some cases, brutally honest about his team to the media tells me that he is saying the exact right things in the locker room as well. So totally. I'm really excited to see him, and I think he can get the best out of Pierre-Luc Dubois as well. And, a lot's been said about PLD in his career. He's only 26, right? This is not a guy that is on the wrong side of 30 just yet. There's still time for him to actually be a really competent player in Carberry's system. I also think that the way I see this lineup shaking out just in the top 6, I want Connor McMichael to play with Pierre-Luc Dubois, and I want Luc Dubois to be able to elevate him as well and do what he's been able to do in all 3 of his stops in the NHL. So I'm excited about this team. I'm obviously wearing rose-colored glasses here because it is my team, all things considered, but I really think with, you add in, a healthy season from Jacob Chychrun, if he gets into the double digits in goals, which is not something any defender not named John Carlson did for Washington this past season, that's big. And I really think this team can excel this year. I don't think it's going to be a Rangers and Devils situation. I don't know if they're going to be pushing into the high triple digits in terms of points, into the 110s, 115s of the world, like they were back in their, prime Ovi days. But this team could still make a run. I really think they can. And when it boils down to leadership, I think Spencer Carberry is the guy to take this team across. And I don't think, it's going to be this team is a machine to get Ovi the record, because that was the narrative last season. And in the first half of last season, it was, Ovi just needs to get the record. He's going to get that over and done with. Then we can start thinking about success. But Carberry's not that kind of coach. He's just not. And that's why I'm really excited about the Caps. I could see them, if things have to break right, you talk about puck bounces all the time. I think they could be 3rd in this Metro. And I don't think that is too drastic of an overreaction because of their signings, but it's going to take some bounces for them for sure.
So I'll say two more quick things about the Capitals, and a pro and a con. The pro, I also like the fact that Lapierre and a lot of these young guys have won back-to-back championships in the minor leagues. I think that's huge. I think winning, no matter where you win, whether you're Gabe Perreault with the United States at the World Juniors, or whether you're LaPierre 2 years in a row with Hershey in the American Hockey League, man, you can't beat it. Winning at any level, I think, is huge. And then you bring kids like that into the mix, along with, in Alex Ovechkin, who's won a Stanley Cup, John Carlson, who's won a Stanley Cup. I think that's a nice blend. The con and the thing that really worried me about Washington that I did not like in the first round against the Rangers was Ovechkin. He was a non-factor, and nothing's come out about him being hurt or anything of that nature. This guy played with zero intensity, zero energy, and that was really worrisome as I saw it, for looking at it, trying to look at it objectively from a Washington point of view. That was really worrisome. And I don't know if the fire wasn't in him, because he's always played with that fire. It was concerning. Let's see what happens. Maybe he'll be energized, heading into the season. Believe the team has more of a chance. I don't know what it was in that first round, but I did not like what I saw from Alex Ovechkin.
See parity every year, and last year the surprise was more in the Devils not making it, where they were expected to kind of progress. But Carolina and New York have been the top this year. It's New York and New Jersey, as you said, but there's always that one team that kind of squeaks their way in, a surprise team that gets into the playoffs. If you look at it this year, who are some teams you're pinning as the surprises going forward?
So just in the Metro or in the East, or
let's do one of each. Or it could be the same team, I guess.
Yeah, I think in the Metro, you'd have to say Washington and Philly. Listen, Philly shocked us all last year. I don't know. I don't know how Torts did it. Smoke and mirrors in Philly. I know they have some good young players, and you looked at that roster, that was not a great team. And then you lose Carter Hart during the season, and you have injuries, and it wasn't a great team. And yet, if the season had ended 2 weeks prior to when it did, they're a playoff team. They're in, Washington's out. Now they probably would have been swept in the first round too, but they would have made it. So there's something there with Tortorella, with that team. And now, they bring, you're going to have a full season of Urson and Fedotov in goal. Fedotov's a real X factor. I don't think we got a feel for what he can be just yet in the NHL. And he's a guy that was pretty good in the KHL. Not a star, but he was pretty good. So maybe that solidifies their goaltending. And of course, that's a big thing that they have not solidified in a long time. Now you bring over Matvei Michkov, 2 years ahead of when you expected to get him. He's still a kid, still a baby. He's only 19. But boy, by all accounts, and I don't proclaim to be watch every KHL game or whatever, but by all accounts, by the people that do follow those games and have seen him play in person, the guy's legit. He should be a legit Calder Trophy candidate, even at the age of 19. That's going to speed up the progression for Philly. I know they didn't do a lot. They didn't bring in a lot of people from outside this year, but they're continuing to bring along the Cam Yorks and guys of that nature. And now Michkov 2 years before they thought they'd get him. And then they got Fedotov over last year. They're a team to watch. I'm not sure that they're a playoff team, but they're a team to watch, along with Washington. And then, if you want to break it open in the East, teams to watch. Detroit did a lot this offseason, and they were kicking at the door last year too. They're a team to watch. I think their goaltending is going to be a lot better. Cam Talbot's probably going to start half their games. He's coming off an all-star season. I think for him to be at his most effective, you're probably looking at 30, 35 games, 40 at most, to keep him at his best. But then you have Huso, Alex Lyon, who's put together a couple good years in a row. They kept Patrick Kane, who I think is going to be much better this year than he was last year, coming off the surgery. That's a team to keep an eye on. And another team to keep an eye on, and I said this last year, it's dead wrong. So I'm going to say it again because maybe another year they're better. Keep an eye on the Ottawa Senators. They have some good young talent there, and now they actually have a guy that can stop the puck between the nets, between the pipes, and Linus Ullmark.
This one for you, and we'll cut you loose. We've kept you way over the 20 minutes that we asked for, and again,
All good.
Really greatly appreciate it. But go back to the Rangers, and we'll let you end on a high note here. All the talk around Igor Shesterkin and the big money deal coming up, the salary cap, the big RFAs, all around that. Looking at this year with, even though maybe seemed like a disappointing offseason, they have the same exact group that came back from a President's Trophy year last year. Cup or bust was the big phrase around Edmonton and the spark word there. Does this now for New York become a cup or bust season where this is a great group coming off a hot season? Igor came off the best performance of his life in the playoffs. If he can continue that, Lafreniere and Trocheck are booming if they can come in at the same level. But then looking at the following year when the cap's going to become an issue, do they have to get it done this year? And same thing with what you said on Carolina. Is that window going to come to a close where they're going to have to make some bad decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the window's narrowing. I'm not sure if it's closing. You could argue that the window could be closing on a certain core of that group. But what they've done well is that there are pieces, some younger pieces to move into the next wave of the core. So if you argue that Lindgren and Trouba, this is their last kick of the can, as part of the core. Kakko could be his last kick at the can with this core. It's cup or bust. But, there's that next wave. Lafreniere is now a newer piece of the core. Perreault and Ottman will be joining that core soon. Not this year for Ottman, next year for either one or both of them. Braden Schneider and Keandre Miller now are becoming young members of the core. So I think they've done a good job to bridge all that. You could argue that this year, maybe the following year, are the windows closing because Artemi Panarin's contract has 2 years to run. And, you cannot understate, no matter how much you want to run him down for the Florida series and for previous years, not playing at that elite level in the Stanley Cup playoffs that he does in the regular season. At the end of the day, he still drives the bus when it comes to the offense of the New York Rangers. They don't get 115 points. They don't win 55 games with our 114 points and 55 games without Artemi Panarin driving the bus offensively. So they've got 2 years to try and win with Panarin. Not saying that they can't re-sign him after that. And, they'd have to bring him in at a lower salary. He'd also be probably his UFA year is his age 34 year, I think. So he may not be the same guy, and he certainly wouldn't be as, the length of that contract moves on. So that kind of changes the feel of your core. But I think this year for sure is a cup or bust feel to it. And I would carry it on another year. Because even if you lose Trouba and Lindgren, arguably, maybe Kakko, I think you still have Panarin, you still have Zibanejad, you still have Kreider, you still have Igor, and then you're at, Lafreniere, Schneider, Miller are still there, and you might be adding Ottman and Perreault. So I think, they're still a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. but the window is narrowing. Last year was a major missed opportunity. So much went right for them last year. So much went right for them. The President's Trophy, the home ice advantage, the just buying into Peter Laviolette's system. They were, I thought, a much better defensive team last year than they had been under Gerard Gallant. So much, went right last year. They win their first first 7 playoff games. They win all these overtime games in the playoffs. It really felt like it was their year until they ran into the brick wall in the conference final, and they couldn't get over that hump. Well, now this year, the questions are, well, is there going to be, again, that complete buy-in to Laviolette's system? Well, it worked last year, but, are we going to work as hard as we did last year? Boy, winning the President's Trophy didn't mean anything come playoff time. Is there a letting up on the gas, or are they extra motivated? Man, did we miss a great opportunity last year? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question. We're going to find out for sure. But, it's hard to go back to back. It's hard. It's going to be hard for Florida to win the Cup again, reach the final for a third year in a row. It's going to be hard for Edmonton to get back to the final. It's going to be hard for the Rangers to have another President's Trophy winning season. It is hard in this league, to repeat those triumphs. But I do believe, as constituted, the Rangers are a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. And even if they fall back, even if they're second place to the Devils next year, arguably, fall back to 107 points, 105 points, whatever, you can say, boy, they're not as good a team. They still have the talent there to be as good, if not better, when the money's on the line next season.
Let me add one more thing, if I can. TNT has the Stanley Cup final next year, which means Sam Rosen will be free to call on ESPN New York the Run. Just put that out to the universe. That's all.
One last kick at the can for Sam as well. Win it for Sam, right? That's the hashtag. Win it for Sam.
Let's get it trending.
I'm Cerny, the executive editor of the New York Rangers Blue Shirts Forever. Jim, we can't thank you enough here, and unfortunately, you're such a nice guy. Now, 2 of the 3 of us are going to have to pull for the Rangers a little extra this year, but greatly appreciate your insight here, and we're wishing you the best of luck here, and hopefully you can enjoy the next, 2 weeks or so here before you got to start really ramping it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, this was a lot of fun, boys. Anytime you want to hang out, talk Metro, talk NHL, talk Rangers, I'm here for you. This was a lot of fun. You guys do a great job.
And we will certainly take you up on that offer. Unbelievable start to September there, and our first guest took us the full hour, and we asked him for 20 minutes, but a huge thank you to Jim Cerny, and unbelievable insight that he gave not only on Georgia's New York Rangers, but the Metropolitan as a whole. And boy, oh boy, we couldn't ask for much better than that. Now we're going to run through the division here and try to touch on each of the teams before we give out each of our predictions for the rest of the division. So it's only fitting to start with the New York Rangers there. And guys, out of that conversation, what were the biggest takeaways you think you got as we look forward to this season and what we can expect out of that team?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think it was universal as far as the offseason kind of being surprising of the 2 quote unquote bigger names that they came away with, being the Rangers and Sam Carrick and Riley Smith. It is a good team, as Jim mentioned. It's the same lineup that produced 114 points last year. It's a good team, but right now they only have just under $630,000 in cap space. Let that rattle around, and we're talking about Lafreniere, Keandre Miller, and Capo Caco was in my mind, but it didn't even occur to me until Jim mentioned it. If he has a breakout year, if they put him on RW1 with Kreider and the Benajad, and he breaks out, boy, that's an interesting play there.
You and I kind of talked about it before we went live on air there, and we both have differing opinions here. I am in the boat that they're going to be better this year than they were last year, even though it was a President's Trophy campaign. You think a little bit of regression there. What would your reason for potential regression be from the side of a Rangers fan there, with the same core coming back and a couple of those additions he talked about? You're a little bit more down on the team this year, even though you still have them in your playoffs, obviously.
Well, I think Jim hit it right on the head, right? It was the first year under Peter Laviolette. Are they going to be as amped up in year 2 to get going, or do they sputter a little bit before they get a, shock to the system and come back to life? I think Jim even mentioned it, and I said it off the air to you guys. 105 points for me seems to be where this Rangers team is going to fall. So when he said the same thing, I was like, oh, all right, okay, that seems about right. I don't see them repeating at 114, or even where you have them. And I won't say where, because you had the comprehensive breakdown of everybody. But that, again, that's just me. That's how I see it. In any event, windows closing. They got to act now. Win it for Sam. Hashtag win it for Sam. Let's get it trending.
Carolina Hurricanes are still without one of their top line guys unsigned. Seth Jarvis still remains among the top unsigned RFAs, right there with Jeremy Swayman, some of the other big names, Lucas Raymond and Mo Seider from Detroit, Thomas Harley from Dallas, the big pieces remaining on the table without contracts. All of the chaos we saw ensue with Edmonton and St. Louis within the last 2 weeks here, the offer sheet situation, Carolina, and he touched on it there earlier as well, but a team that is up against the cap, and part of the reason that window is closing with the salary cap era, they have just over $8 million remaining after re-signing Martin Necas to a 2-time $6.5 million deal. But it was expected going into the season, we might see Jarvis on around a 9.5 million. Well, now I think it's 8.2 million is all that they could possibly offer him max. The last report I just heard earlier today was an 8-year, around 8 million, north of $8 million deal. It'll be interesting to see what pressures that puts on the team, because if you max out your salary cap, that just about eliminates any movement at the deadline. You're going to have to give away pieces. But on top of that, I want to get your guys' opinions on this as well. With the offer sheets, it's been baffling to me that we're this late into the season and some of these big name guys don't have contracts, and especially on a team like Carolina where they're completely up against the cap. And I know it would require giving away a first-round pick, but in my opinion, and it might be a little bit of home bias, but Jarvis is a guy who plays power play, penalty kill, top line minutes, where that's a guy that could be a core piece of your franchise. Why do we not see a team like, maybe, how about a Utah who's got as much cap as they want to deal anywhere? Chicago's got all kinds of cap, which obviously they'll have to give to some of their up and coming guys, but like a Utah could give out an 8 times $8 million deal, no problem, an 8 times $9 million deal. And Carolina would have absolutely no option if Jarvis decided he wanted to go there. And there's plenty of players that are in the same scenario there.
I think you already mentioned it. It's not just the cap, it's the draft capital that you have. Now, Utah is in a unique position where for 2025 they have 1 first, 1 second, and 2 thirds, excuse me. But then and that's if you're going 6.8 to 9.2, that's what you're going to have to give up: a first, a second, and a third. If you go anywhere above 9.2 to 11.5, you're giving up 2 first-round picks plus a second plus a third. So your draft capital comes into play as well, right? It isn't just your salary cap and your numbers there. Do you have the draft capital to execute something like that?
And obviously you got to have the picks, but in my opinion, I'd rather have a player that's already proven, up and coming, steadily adding 20 points per season to the list. But rather than taking a risk at a draft, especially, first round pick is a big deal. But when you're taking it from a good team, the last 3 years they've had picks in the 20 to 28 range. That's not necessarily giving you much. Again, it's a shot in the dark there, and you got 5 to 10 years for a guy who's to be ready by then. But uh, moving on from there, the New York Islanders are next in list, and we're going in order of last year's finish. They were the third place team in the Metro, and for the second year in a row, knocked out by the Carolina Hurricanes in the playoffs. This offseason, they add Anthony Duclair, but primarily remain the same with their core. And despite the offensive barriers that especially shined in the postseason, but a lot throughout the regular season as well, and the goaltending struggles with Ilya Sorokin on a $8.25 million per season long-term contract, being outplayed by the backup there for much of the regular season and also into the playoffs. They don't make much of a change. What do you guys think on the Islanders? Is there any hope for the Islanders? I have them way down towards the bottom.
Yeah, I think the key thing here, Casey, about this team is that a lot of the other teams in this division, we were just talking about it, either got a lot better or, like the Rangers stayed at their upper echelon. And you take a look at what the Islanders have done is they haven't really done much, and that they don't really have too much in terms of firepower that makes me think they can compete with a really, really strong division that is the Metro. Now, I don't think they're going to finish, last. I don't think it's going to be quite that big of a fall from grace for them, but I don't really see them as being too competitive. And if the question is there any hope of making a legitimate run? I think the answer is unequivocally no. Is there any hope of them staying middle of the pack or being middle of the pack and maybe, making an inexplicable late run if they make some deals down the line? There's the potential for that. But even if so, I don't think they have what it takes to be a legitimate contender in a division that also has the Rangers and the New Jersey Devils, two teams that could challenge to be the best in the entirety of the NHL. I just don't think the Islanders are remotely close to that.
And that Sorokin deal is unfortunate because it's $8.25 million through 2032.
That's just crazy.
And for him to be outplayed by Varlamov, who was 35 last year and is only making 2.75, I'm sure there's a lot of people scratching their heads, including Islanders fans, as to what happened with that deal.
On that, he's still making 2.75. That's your backup. You got 11 million, and that goes back to episode 1, which I keep bringing up over and over again. But my stance on the goaltenders, and you don't pay the goaltenders, and Igor is an exception because I would pay him. But that's a case where it has not worked out at all, and the Islanders are paying quite a bit for it. Washington Capitals. We got a lot of great insight from Jim on this team. In my opinion, was up in my top 3 biggest success stories of the entire off season. Colin, I'll hand it over to you. Your takeaways, your excitement for your team.
Yeah, you already heard me kind of wax poetic and extol the virtues of this offseason, but I'll say one more thing about the Caps. And I think that they're kind of being overlooked just in terms of the fact that I think a lot of the narrative about them is still kind of, oh, it's Ovechkin, he's aging, he's declining. And Jim mentioned part of this. And to Jim's credit, he's not wrong about the way Ovechkin looked during that Rangers playoff series, because, in this age, the twilight of his career, he's been a defensive liability. He's frankly been a defensive nightmare in the past couple of years specifically. But when you don't see that fire, as Jim put it, in the playoffs, there is a little bit of a cause for concern. But I do think that that kind of narrative, or at least that mentality from the outside, is going to be dashed by the way that the Caps start this season. And I would say that one other key takeaway is that I think Charlie Lindgren and Logan Thompson are going to be a really strong goaltender duo. I think it's going to be maybe not a pure starter backup, maybe a little 1A, 1B for Washington, but I think this team's going to do it. I not do it in terms of win the Stanley Cup, although that would be, awesome. I think they're going to be in that top 3 in this Metro. I think they overtake Carolina. Like I said before, it's not going to be right up there with New Jersey and New York, but I think they they can, chisel out a spot for themselves and get a playoff spot, not get the toughest draw in the playoffs like they did this past season, and maybe find their way into the second round for the first time in 6 years.
Jim threw a very low-key shot at the Pittsburgh Penguins when we were talking about the minimal offseason of the New York Rangers, and he said the only team that did less was the Pittsburgh Penguins. Recently, a trade that we also touched on in the Rutger McGroarty trade is the Penguins trade McGroarty from Winnipeg. They acquire him and they give away Braden Yeager, both of them players that are prospects, haven't played in the NHL yet. Both were 14th overall draft picks in different years. But McGroarty told Winnipeg that he would not sign there after they didn't let him come this year. They recommended him go back to Michigan, and he decided that was enough for him. I need a new spot. The Penguins are now his location, but Pittsburgh ranks 26th in NHL prospect pools. They're a max cap team right now, which is the reason that they were prevented from making any major offseason moves. And a lot of that is because of the Erik Karlsson deal. And I want to go back to last season. Kyle Dubas comes in. The first thing he does is he inks a crazy high big money deal for Erik Karlsson after a freak season in San Jose. But you can't expect that every year, in my opinion. I was baffled by the decision there. And then now this year, they have no cap to work with. They can't sign anybody. They have a terrible prospect pool. Was that Karlsson deal one of the worst mistakes that Kyle Dubas has made? And two, is this the end for the Pittsburgh Penguins under the Crosby-Malkin era?
I'm still trying to wrap my head around that Karlsson deal. I mean, not only was, as you mentioned, Casey, it was a freak year in San Jose, but he's 34 this year. And that contract's going to run $10 million through 27, 28, and he's got a full no move clause. Does matter because I don't
give
know.
Away a crazy amount of picks too. I forgot to throw in there as well to trade for him before the signing.
Yeah, that the draft capital they gave up for that was ridiculous, and he's got a full no move clause, and it doesn't matter because I don't think anybody's going to look at Karlsson and be like, you know what, I want him at $10 million. There's going to be no wiggle room, at least this year in this year's cap, for many, if any, teams to pick him up, unless Pittsburgh's going to eat $5 million of that 10, the maximum that you're allowed to eat in a trade.
The Philadelphia Flyers, big offseason moves. We're adding their Russian prospects. Matvei Michkov and Ivan Fedotov come over from the KHL. Now will play in the NHL. Fedotov, a very large goaltender, which will likely not give up too many shooting lanes, and Michkov, a very talented forward. With the core of the team remaining much the same in another year under John Tortorella, it's interesting where Jim points out that it's not a very good team, and really their only big additions were the two guys that are going to be rookie seasons. And I'm kind of on the opposite. I think they're close. I think give them 2 or 3 more years, maybe the following year after this year. I don't think they make it this year. Are you guys expecting a lot out of Philadelphia this season?
I don't think so. I think they're middle of the pack. I think we all had them somewhere 5 or 6 in our picks. It's just you got the goalie, you got Fedotov, which isn't young, but he's relatively new to the NHL, right? But there's really nothing there. Plus, you have the whole Ryan Johansson thing that happened. You get social media putting him on blast, dancing at a friend's wedding. That doesn't sit well. I'm sure Torts was very happy about that, let me tell you. But it's a solid team. If they didn't have to push so hard in the middle portion of the season, I don't think they break down at the end and miss the playoffs. With by and large, and the Caps did what the Caps did, and that was fantastic. But I think we touched upon this in episode 1 with Colin, And he was very straightforward. He goes, yeah, it was a Hershey Bears lineup that's going out there for the playoffs, which is bad for the Washington Capitals, but great for those players. So you had a Philly team that broke down at the end of the year. Can they turn around then and pick up where they had it in the middle of the year and sustain it? I don't think so. I don't, even with Torts on the bench, I don't think it happens. They're maybe a wild card team in the next couple of years, but that's probably their ceiling.
The saga continues, and last season it was drama after drama after drama, which I'm sure Jim had an absolute ball over. But as you mentioned, Ryan Johansson putting the Philadelphia Flyers in the news, and really the Flyers doing it to themselves. On August 20th, the Flyers placed Ryan Johansson on unconditional waivers for the purpose of terminating his contract due to what they call material breach based on his unwillingness to report to the AHL last season after a trade from Colorado. It was allegedly due to injury, but George, as you mentioned, a video comes out of him dancing at his friend's wedding, and now they're saying that he should have been playing down in the AHL. The termination for now is final. He has the opportunity to contest it if he would like, and we assume that that will happen. We'll keep an eye on that story. The New Jersey Devils, we got plenty on that. So what I'll ask you guys, out of the additions they have, we have Markstrom in net. Dougie Hamilton comes back off injury. Brett Pesce on the defensive core. Steph Nason and Paul Cotter. Depth in the offense. Which of those players do you anticipate making the biggest role in this Devils lineup?
I think it's Dougie Hamilton, just like Jim said. To lose him was a big, big loss for the Devils. And he alluded to it as well, but watching some of their games, they just seem discombobulated out on the ice. You need a general out there. You need someone on the blue line to kind of help facilitate coming out of their own zone. And Dougie Hamilton has been that. That's why he was drafted out in Boston, and that's why the Bruins fans were so upset after he left or was traded away. And then, he winds up back in the East with New Jersey. They kind of turn things around on the blue line. They pick up Luke Hughes. He's kind of mentoring Luke Hughes on the blue line. I think that's going to be their biggest return.
Talk about the Laine trade a little bit next week with Jimmy Murphy. But Patrick Laine traded from the Columbus Blue Jackets to Montreal, another one of the big trades that just went down. Don Waddell taking the helm from Jarmo Kekalainen, former Clarkson guy who was fired early last season. Waddell comes from Carolina and now taking over the Blue Jackets. His first order of business was firing the coach and hiring Dean Evason to go behind the bench. Remember, Waddell took over Carolina from being on the list of the longest active playoff droughts to now one of the longest playoff success stories with 6 straight appearances. The Blue Jackets entering a stage this year where they have to expect some of their young players to take strides. Going into their 4th years are Sillinger and Chinnikov. 3rd-year guys Marchenko, Johnson, and Juracek, and 2nd years for Fantilli and Varanov. Sillinger just signed a bridge deal and a $2 million prove-it deal. But Columbus still a long ways away. They finished in the bottom of the table last year with just 68 points, didn't eclipse the 70 mark. And Dean Evason comes in. One of the biggest problems is defensive structure. Colin, we'll go to you, trying to find defensive success. You come from Northeastern, a team that finds that against some of the best offenses maybe in existence in NCAA hockey. What do you think some of the biggest things from a coaching side and the young prospects that we get to see night in and night out that are going to have to come together for Columbus to be successful next year?
Yeah, real quick on Columbus, I think the key thing that you can notice, and you mentioned it, Casey, is that they're still a ways away. And when you're a new coach coming in, especially one with the body of work that Evason has, I think the first thing that he should do is trust his young players, trust these new guys, and get them some serious ice time. I'm not talking, 8 minutes of fourth line minutes or third pair minutes. I'm talking get them some time against top players. If it's defenders, get them some time against the top forwards in this conference in the NHL and throw them right into the fire. And there's a line you have to toe there. There is a balance, of course, but with this Blue Jackets roster, you're not expecting a Stanley Cup caliber team this season. What you're expecting or what you're hoping is that, on offense, a guy like Fantilli will be able to thrive in a new system. But in order to do that, he's got to get the playing time. Maybe it's not top line, top power play, but maybe it is top line, top power play. Maybe it is getting Fantilli the time he needs to both make mistakes and get out of those and build those better habits. So, when you talk about Fantilli, or even if it's a guy a little bit older like Cole Sillinger, like you mentioned, Casey, is still getting him that time and finding a way, because Fantilli is going to be that guy, ideally a top line guy going forward for this team. So throw him up there at the very least. Give your younger players the time to gel together, to, as you said, Casey, tighten up together and be able to really figure out how this team is going to operate in the future. So I think the key storyline here is this new coach, is Evason, throwing in a new system, retooling things around, and how they're going to operate under that system. So I don't see them being even a middle of the pack team. I see them still probably finishing toward the bottom. If it's not the last team, it's bottom two. But there's still reasons to be excited for Columbus. It's just going to take some time to get there.
Columbus clears up quite a bit of cap. Line a guy who had 3 more years on an $8 million and change dollar contract. They got rid of him essentially for free, adding an ELC and clearing that deal. So Columbus has some room to move as well, if that comes at the trade deadline or likely in next year's offseason for Don Waddell and company. All right, we've made it through all 8, and it's time to make some predictions. And I've got it listed out with points, so try to beat that here. We'll go worst to first. I'm going to start at the 8 spot with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and I think the Penguins are on the way down. I see a lot of regression coming here, and unfortunately, it's not Sidney Crosby's fault, but I just don't see much around him. I did like a lot of what Michael Bunting did in that lineup after the trade from Carolina. I thought he was a great addition to get some grit and maybe a little bit of youth in a very old lineup, but old assets. Malkin slowed down quite a bit. I thought Letang was still good last year, but how long can those guys hang on? We saw Ovechkin get hit with the old man stick last year, and it's only a matter of time before that comes, and especially around rumors on whether or not Sidney Crosby is going to stay. I have them at the bottom with 77 points, so I still think it's a high-scoring division. Columbus in 7th bumps up a spot, but I have them up 11 points from last year at 79. Again, they were at 68 last season. Still a few years away, but a little bit of improvement there. The New York Islanders, I have at 6 with just 86 points, 8 down from last year. Maybe a fringe team could make a run on the bubble of the wild card, but I don't see them anywhere near the top of this division unless it's in the first 2 weeks of the season. And in my opinion, out of the 3 teams that I think are in the hunt there, Colin's going to make it 4. I think they did the least, and they're the weakest of those from the offseason. Washington, I have at 5, and listening to Jim talk, I almost did what George did and changed my lineup halfway through the interview. But I'm going to stick to it. I put them at 5. I think they'll get around 88 to 90 points, right around the same as last year. They improved miles from last year, but when you look at the way they finished the season to get in, and it was a miracle that they got there, I think this year is going to be a little bit different of a story, and maybe they make a wild card spot. I don't think so, but I think it comes on a steady season. They're going to be a good team, a good competitive team night in, night out, but I think that puts them right around the 90 mark. And I think in the East is going to be a really strong division this year. I think that falls just short, same as the team I have number 4, Philadelphia Flyers, I think are going to improve a little bit. 92 points I have them at this season, a fringe playoff team, maybe a wild card spot, but I don't think with the rookies, I don't think they're going to be able to get it done. The one question that I would have would be if Tortorella's strategy can continue to pay out. We've seen it time in and time out with the jobs he gets, that it works for a few years, and then the hard-nosed style of old coaches just kind of wears off, and especially with a very young team there. I think only 3 teams get in out of the East. I got the Hurricanes, the Devils, and the Rangers in that order from worst to first. Carolina, I think, is going to regress a little bit. I have them down 7 points from last year. A lot of key pieces there, but I do like the pieces they added, even though Jim was kind of against it, and Gostisbehere and Sean Walker. I think Gostisbehere is a guy who's not a flashy name, but he played there before. He loves Rod Brindamore, had a ton of success running the power play and putting up point production. So I don't think they're, and halfway through July 1st, I was having a nightmare. I thought they were having the worst off season and the worst July 1st of any team, but I think they kind of saved it at the end with those 2 defensive signings. And just as he mentioned, I think Rod Brindamore is really the key piece to motivate the guys. That's why they don't have playoff success, but they're a regular season team. So I got them at 104, and I think it'll be a battle for the top 2. I got the Devils second at 113. I think the Rangers win the President's Trophy, and unlike George, I think they improve on last year. I got them at 118 to win the President's Trophy. They didn't lose any core pieces. Shesterkin is on fire coming off last season, and if he can continue that, that's my rankings, George.
So just to touch upon your Hurricanes and saying, Jim wasn't impressed. He said, if I remember correctly, and I quote, "They're step backwards from Brady Shea and Brett Pesce," which is true. They are not on the same level as Brady Shea and Brett Pesce, which is why he made that comment, and which is why I dropped the Hurricanes down to 4th, right? Because it's like, okay, as good as the Brindamore system is, and I know Gostisbehere had success in that system, can that decor and can Freddie Anderson hold up for the season? I don't think they'll be able to. So without further ado, here are my rankings. Worst to first, just like you, Casey. Penguins down in the basement. Jackets, Islanders, Flyers, not quite there yet. I don't think they're even going to sniff a wild card this year, or maybe even ever in the recent future. Hurricanes at 4, possibly at wild card, but you got Rangers, top 3, Rangers, Devils, Capitals. I don't think the Rangers are going to hit into 110, 111, 112. If that doesn't happen, then the Devils will go number 1, and the Rangers will probably have like 105, so it'll put them at 2. But I was always impressed with what the Capitals did. I'm a big fan of Matt Waugh. I think he's underrated, me personally. Big fan of his. So like the addition there. I like the addition of Logan Thompson in between the pipes for him and Charlie Lindgren to just split the time. And I think that's what's going to catapult them into a playoff position this coming year.
On your rankings.
Well, first things first, George, I love that you said you don't think the Flyers are going to be near the playoffs maybe ever. As a DC guy, I mean, that just warms my heart. And I'm kind of with you on that in terms of where they're going to finish this season. Going worst to first, it's kind of the usual suspects here. I have the Blue Jackets finishing last. I just don't think they have enough. I mean, maybe it's a little bit closer at the bottom there, but regardless, I think it's still going to be them finishing last. Pittsburgh, second to last, then Philadelphia. So that's that bottom 3. I think, the Islanders are going to be right there, finishing 5th in the Metro. And then the top 4, I think it's right where you were, George, as well. Islanders, I should say Canes 4th, then Caps, Devils, Rangers. But like I've been saying all podcasts long, I still think that it's going to be the Rangers and the Devils in that echelon, the tier to themselves. If you want to break it down into tiers, that top tier will be Rangers, Devils. The middle tier will be Capitals, Canes, and then the bottom will be the bottom 4. So I think, like Casey was saying, there will be 3 playoff teams from this, but I think the Caps will be that third one instead of Carolina.
And I think we're all in the same boat there on the top 2. And it'll be interesting to run back on this come April and see who had the most success. We're going to do it for every division. Maybe we put together a little point system. Back to our betting segment. It's been a little while since we've thrown something out there, and the last one, I got flamed for my choice of the Edmonton Oilers being my Stanley Cup pick because apparently that was too vanilla. But I got a couple of good ones coming up here. Colin, we'll start with you. What's shifting your eyes here on the betting market? Maybe go with a make miss playoff option.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. That's an easy one. That's an easier one for me. I'll just go with the Caps making the playoffs. I was looking at the odds. I don't have them right in front of me, but I was looking at the odds earlier today, and it's in the plus 1,300 to plus 1,700 range, and that looks pretty good. I mean, it's obviously a bit of a long shot for the odds makers, but the way that we've been talking about this team today, the way that I think about them on a futures pick right now, I don't hate that at the very least, putting my money where my mouth is there about my team.
George?
So I have it's not good, but I have Dallas winning the Western at plus 550. I loved what I saw out of them last year. I think Otter's terrific in goal, and I think it's the chance now for Dallas, even though they lose a couple of big time guys in the locker room. I think they're poised and ready to make another good run and represent the West this year.
That is a wild pick for the Metropolitan segment.
All right. Well, if we're okay, if you want to do that, then I gotta hold hard and go with the Devils at plus 240.
I got a couple here. My honorable mention is going to be an over under on points. I got the Blue Jackets over 70.5 points. That's minus 110. So if you're looking for about even money odds, last year they put up 66 points. I've been saying 68 all podcasts, but 66 was the final number there. This year you add a new coach, you get Fantilli back from injury, more experience out of those young guys, and a really interesting stat that I found when I was reading up on this. The Blue Jackets led the NHL last season in blown leads. 25 of their losses last year came from scoring the first goal and giving up that lead, and more of those came from not scoring the first goal, taking the lead, and still losing by an onslaught. Even a slight improvement gets them to 71 there if you win three more of those 25 games that you were leading at one point. So I think that's easily attainable. So that's my honorable mention. But my favorite pick is the President's Trophy winner, New York Rangers. And I was trying to scroll through and find them. They're like halfway down the list of President's Trophy. They're behind the Carolina Hurricanes, which is blasphemous because I'm right with you guys. I don't think the Hurricanes are going to be very competitive at all. I got them. I think the top three is solidified, and you can throw one or two of those next teams in, like you guys have the Capitals. But the New York Rangers plus 1,300 to win the President's Trophy. Disappointing finish in the postseason. So as Jim mentioned, it could go two ways. I've got the way of them being hungry and just dominating this year. Last year they had a couple of lulls where Shesterkin wasn't playing good. Jonathan Quick had to back him up. I don't think that's going to happen this year. You've got Shesterkin on a contract year. He's trying to make the biggest bag in goaltending history, and I think he's going to get that no problem after he just tears it up this season. Lafreniere and Trocheck are both coming off massive strides in the playoffs. I think they both continue to succeed. Lafreniere is also kind of in that same boat, looking for a big bag upcoming. So in my opinions, all signs are in George's favor. It pains me real bad to say that it's the New York Rangers as my go-to pick. Guys, we'll close it off here with my favorite news that I found from the week. A brand new upcoming team in the Federal Prospects League, the Athens Rock Lobsters. That might be one of the coolest names I've ever heard, joining some of my personal favorites out of the ECHL and the Swamp Rabbits, the Solar Bears, Ghost Pirates, and the Night Monsters. But the Athens Rock Lobsters, I already I ordered my merch. Fun fact here, I'm trying to convince my girlfriend that should it go down the line and a kid comes, that I think Brock Lobster would be a great name. So when I saw that, I was just I was laughing so hard. What looked at the play-by-play job. Unfortunately, it pays about $100 a week, so I don't think that one's in the business. But um, we have some extremely big news on that note. One of those teams that was just listed off as a new voice. Colin?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess this is the first time I'm actually saying this somewhat publicly, but yeah, I'll be taking my talents to the West Coast or the west side of the country, I guess, to be the new voice of the Tahoe Night Monsters. I'm super stoked for it. It's been a real kind of whirlwind of events to get to this point. I was in Wisconsin, went through the whole process over there and got the call over there, but the key thing I think of when I kind of contextualize this with myself and with the people I've told is that this is just the beginning, right? It's that step forward. It's that first step out of college, and that first step, actually in this business, just like Casey and George, you guys have done yourself. So I'm really excited to get over there. Really excited to be a part of a new team and be a part of the Vegas Golden Knights and Henderson Silver Knights pipeline. So yeah, that's the news. It's exciting. I'm going to get over there in about a month, and the season starts in almost exactly 2 months. So I'm super stoked for it. I was thinking, as we were recording today, George, you just did a game with one of my good friends, Milton Posner, and I was like, man, it would have been great if George and I got on a call together, but that's not to be for now. But maybe down the line it'll happen, or you and I, Casey, would be fun. But I'm super excited to go to the west side of the country and see Lake Tahoe and be a part of that organization.
Even more exciting, he has made it clear that he still plans on being a part of the Fifth Liners podcast. And we get to take a little bit of credit because the whole point of starting this podcast was to help everybody go big. And for those who don't know Colin, he did it all himself. But I'm going to say that we had a little bit of piece in that as he's our first guy with a professional contract here. But, Colin, we've seen it on the back end, and those who follow might not know it as well because you've only been on a couple episodes here, and the reason for that was you worked your absolute pants off all summer calling baseball games and doing everything that comes along with that job. But we want to extend some major congratulations. We're super proud of you and looking forward to having you call in on West Coast time, and we'll have to adjust our schedule to recording a little bit later for that.
Well, it's going to make I think my life a little bit easier because instead of recording till 1 a.m., it'll be recording to, maybe 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. Yeah. So, that'll be good, at least on my end. So I actually can get some sleep, but no, I'm obviously, thankful for you guys for at least having me on, continuing to have me on here on this show. And, you remember why we do it is to bring our passion to whatever market we go to, and this team is bringing hockey to a new market. So that's the job, and that's what I'm really excited to do.
Really proud of you, man. Really proud of you. Tahoe's got a good one out there, and you got a good person to look up to in the TV booth for Vegas and Dave Gosher. So
yeah,
that does it for episode 8 of the Fifth Liners podcast, and our first of the weekly schedule as we start to ramp up here. Hockey season just about a month away for George and I. NCAA women's hockey is this month, and very excited for that. Big thank you to Jim Cerny for all of his time and his excellent insight. Want to give a huge thank you as well to Marco Hidalgo behind the scenes, who puts together all these episodes that you hear and watch, our audio and video production engineer, who's hard at work, it seems like, all the time for us. And he hasn't complained once all summer as we've asked him to hop on Zoom calls at all hours of the night. And he's been up late editing and putting these together last minute as we give him the content at 9 p.m. and ask him to have it out 9 a.m. the next night. But this week he's got a little more time to edit it. But a big thank you to him. Big thank you to Jim. Big thank you to you guys as well. For George Bannister and Colin Kapoor, I'm Casey Ditzel. We'll see you next time here on the Fifth Liners Hockey Podcast.